This video lesson will be about blocks and how we create blocks and how they're used. Basically, a block is comprised of individual objects. Excuse me. These individual objects then can be used to symbolize other things, but blocks can go far beyond just creating symbols. You can also create blocks out of parts of drawing files and send them off to someone else as a complete drawing file. Very interesting use. We'll discover that at a later date, or we'll talk about that at a later date. But for now, let's just talk about the basic symbology, how we create it, and how we can add text to it and what that all means. So let's go ahead and first of all what I'll do is create a bunch of objects and we'll bring them together to look like a block or to be a block. So I think I'll create a circle and I will put C out here out the keyboard and click, and I'll draw it out for unit of 1. So I've got a sized circle, and I think I'll put in a rectangle, and just to show you how crazy we can get with creating symbols. And then what I'll do is go ahead and create a block by coming up here to use the create button up here on the ribbon, or I'll just type block at the command line. Once I type block or select create block, I get what we call a block definition dialog box, and I'm going to give this a definition of junk2. I've already created one called junk earlier, and what I have to do is pick some point. Now typically when you create a block, you would pick a point that makes some sense for insertion. So you could put it just about anywhere you like. So just for the heck of it, I'll put it there. And then what I have to do is select those things that I want to be part of my block. So I would select the 2 parts here, and now you'll see that I get junk2 as a name, and it comes with a circle and a rectangle. And once I've done that, I can say OK, and this is now a block, and it's got 1 pick point instead of many. So if I want to insert that over and over again, I would go to Insert, find junk2 on my pull down, say OK, and insert it. Or I could type just I at the command, insert it, and there. So now I have 3 instances of 1 block, so I don't have to go back and recreate it over and over again. There they are. And of course, if I hit return, and now I've created a target shape. But now I'm going to create these targets, but it's going to be in my plan, and each one is going to be individualized. They have to have some kind of information about them, such as if I'm doing point numbers from a survey, each point would have to have an individual number, so we can differentiate between point 1 and point 2. The symbol really doesn't tell us that. So what I'll do in this case is I can go to block, and I can do what they call define an attribute. Well, in this case, I can select this, or I can type @def at the command line, and I get an attribute definition. Now mind you, I've not made the block yet. We're not there, so I've got to add another object before I do the block. So the tag is the identifier for what that block will represent. So in this case, it'll be point number, and I can put in a default or leave that blank. Let's leave this one blank for this time. And then I can put in a text style. These text styles are, of course, found in our text tables. I will use a standard in this case. And then I think I'll assign it a text height of 0.5. And there you go, 0.5. So there's my first one. If I type @def again, I can go ahead and create even more. So I'll create 2 more. This one will be description. As a tag, the default will be empty again, but one thing that will be turned on now is I can align below the previous definition. So if I do that, all the text settings now gray out because they'll all be the same text setting, and I say OK. And when I say OK, up comes description. one more time. Let's put in elevation. Elevation, we'll put in a default this time of 9999, which typically means that there was no elevation taken at that point. Again, a line below, and say OK. And we've got the basics of our block. Now at this point, all that we need to do is actually make the block. So I can come up here and create the block, or in my case, I will type BLOCK at the command line, and I will give it the name of target. And I have to pick a point. Well, again, you want to pick a point that makes sense. So most points you want to fall dead center on top of what it is that you're trying to identify. So that'll be my pick point, and then I select the objects. A good practice would be to select the object that makes the point and then go through the attribute as you would like to see them, although this can always be changed at a later date. But this ensures the order in which they will appear on your screen. And I hit enter, and now I see my block's been made, and I say OK. Since I've already had one called block up there, it asked me to redefine it. So what I've done is taken a block called target I've made previously, and I'm redefining it to look like this. So I'm going to put in a point number of 1, and then move down here to description, say this is a benchmark, and then the elevation instead of 9999 is 1000, and say OK. So I've created this block. It's a benchmark in this case, and it's got an elevation of 1000. Let's go ahead and do that again. If I hit return, I'll go back to my block definition. Oops, I don't want block definition. Now I want to go ahead and do an insert. I hit I for insert. Up comes target. It's the last one that was made. It remembers it. And I say OK, and I insert it. And this time it starts coming up and asking me to fill in the various attributes. So number 2, this one's going to be tree. We'll say 12-inch tree. Type 12-inch tree, which you usually use as your diameter. Hit enter again. Elevation. Let's say this is 998.56, and hit enter. So now I have 2 different blocks or symbols with two different meanings, because they are different. Now you can see that they're different, although the symbol itself is the same. Now if I want to change any one of these symbols to be different, for instance, let's take this benchmark. If I double click it, I will get what we call an attribute editor. And this attribute editor will allow me to change the text options by selecting the tag. I can change the text options, the height, the text style, or the properties. In this case, let's change the property of color. Let's make this this one red and say apply, and you can see it's turned it red, and say OK. Note that the other one's still white, and if I do an insert of a block again, let's go ahead and say OK to that, and insert it, point number 3, and this one will be TP for turning point, and this elevation will be 0. You'll note that it defaults back to that color. If I want to make a global change and make all these red, then I would need to do is go back to my block attribute definition, and there's another one called managing attributes, or Batman at the command line, and that will make global changes. So I'm going to type Batman, B-A-T-T-M-A-N. I will get my block editor or block attribute manager. Again, I need to select the tag I want to edit. I will edit it, and I will change something about its property. In this case, let's go ahead and do the color, and then go back to the attributes, leave it alone, default, that's fine, say OK. come to description, go into edit mode. Again, I get the attribute editor. Properties, this time I will turn that to be green, say OK, and elevation, edit that one, go to color, and I will turn that to yellow, and say OK. Now if I apply, you'll see that all of them have changed colors. Okay, I can also move it up and hit apply, and you'll see the elevation now for target has been moved up in the edit chain. Move it up again, and then I can make it and apply. I can make it at the top. So the next time I bring in target, say OK. You'll see the first one it asked me for is elevation. 1500 we'll say, point number 3, and description. Okay, so you can see how it moved up. I changed the order in which it would actually bring up and prompt me for the information. Again, if I go into Batman, I can then go ahead and change that back. So I'll go ahead for grins and I'll change that back. So elevation, I will move down to the bottom, description, leave it where it is, apply. And here's all the defaults in the list of how they would look. Say OK. Sync them all up. And that is what we do to create a block. Now, blocks can be, like I said before, can be almost anything. Let me go ahead and get rid of these, and I'll create a whole different block again. I'll make this one a very simple shape of a rectangle. And inside this rectangle, I'll put some circles and mirror those. And then for grins, shift key nearest, I'll draw a line through here, and I'll make it, to make sure, I'll make it perpendicular. Only find perpendicular. Okay, let's say this is a stovetop that I'm doing some work inside a home. So let's create some attributes for this. Now remember, I've got to group all my objects together first. So let's go back in here, and I will go to my attribute definition, and I'll put in the name of the stove. So this might be a tag that would say manufacturer. These don't show up, and I will leave it at standard. 0.5 is fine, and say OK. Notice this is grayed out, and I say OK. Now where do I want to put it? I'll put it there. Again, now it's not grayed out for a line, and I'll put in model number or part number. Leave it alone and say OK, and it'll align itself. Oops, I had a space, forgotten about that. Let's do that now. Part number and say OK. And one more time, let's put in cost. And from cost, we will line below and say OK. So now I've got all the parts for stoves that might be going into a kitchen or a restaurant. So there might be a number of them. Now I can go ahead and create the block. I'll go up here to the create button, find it. I'll call this stove, will be the name of the part. The pick point for where I want to put it in from, where would be the pick point? Well, if you remember, I told you before, sometimes it's best to find a pick point on here that is not on the object. So I'm going to go into track, remember how track works, and I will find the midpoint of this line, shift, midpoint, there it is, and I'll pull it up this way. Let's go, let's go 0.5. And right there, when I'm done tracking, and track, and select objects, it will be all of these, and then manufacturer, part number, and cost. And say OK. So manufacturer, let's say Whirlpool, part number, whatever it might be, 1816789-A, and then the cost $1,500. Say OK. So now we have the information about it. If we select it, we'll see that it's got a pick point up here. So let's say I'm putting my stoves in and it has to fit the wall. Then I can pick the pick point here and move it. So you can see how that works. And of course it could be rotated and all the other things that you need to do. So let's get rid of that line. Working with these again, if I want to change any of these particular numbers and edit just one of the stoves, I can double click on here and bring it up, and I can go to cost and I can change the properties on it, or change the value, let's say to 1000, and change all the values individually. Okay. Another thing I can do though, if I go into Batman, maybe I don't want to show people that amount of money in my block. Go to Batman and find that block here, stove, go to cost, let's edit that, and let's change how it appears. So if we go to the attributes, we'll click on it and make cost invisible. Apply, and you'll see cost is now gone. So now if I insert the next stove, and let's put it there, it's going to ask for the manufacturer. Let's say it's Whirlpool again. Enter. Part number 16780-98A, and then the cost, let's say 1005, just for the heck of it, and hit enter. And again, note that the cost does not appear, but the cost is there. This means that if I were to build a bill of material, I can actually extract this information into an Excel file, and I can do a bill of material and all the stove cost, windows, whatever it is I'm creating, by putting the cost into this. The part number is always good, so that you can always then purchase it that way, or purchase it by part number, and have that in the database. So you can have various stoves, various symbols of various costs, which, as I showed the other day, you can actually go to some of these sites like Kohler, and you will find 2 and 3D symbols done in AutoCAD already with the part numbers and with the manufacturer, so that you can readily buy this information directly. That's all I need to say about blocks today. I hope this was worthwhile, and next I'll create one on fields, and then follow up with the last on X references.